that you are doing very well and keeping busy and active and still having fun at home. I would like to do an audiobook series just for you, and I would like to share some of my most favourite children's books with you. And some of those books will be personal childhood favourites of mine, and I will share some of them with you during the series. Now, children's books are my absolute favourite books to read. If I go into a library, I don't go to the adult section, I go straight to the children's section to read and to look at the beautiful covers and the funny stories. And I've always loved children's books, and I'm a big fan of a lot of children's authors, and I try to bring them as well into the classes when I can. And we all know a special week I like to do in September. Let's see if you know the answer to that question regarding a certain author. So I do like to do a lot of work around children's authors, children's books, and me personally, I prefer to read children's books rather than adults' books. I just find them more entertaining. Visually, I love looking at them, and they always generally make me smile or laugh. So, with that being said, each week I am going to deliver you an audiobook for our younger children and one for our older children. The younger children, you will get a new book every week, but the older children, you will probably be having a book over a period of weeks. So maybe I will read 3 chapters every week until we get to the end. I am going to also set you a challenge for the books that we are reading. So look out for that in the videos. What I would love is for you to request some books. So what are your favourite books? What do you like to read? And if you can put your requests in the comments below this video, that would be wonderful, and I can add it to my list of books. You may even want to record your own audiobook. And if you do, and you share it with me, I can add it to the audiobook series. When we look at our audiobooks, so when I read the books to you, we're going to work on our voices and changing different character voices, which is something that we have to do in drama and in acting. So not only will we be working on our reading, we will also be working on our acting as well at the same time, because we're going to do some voice work. So I hope that the audiobooks will keep us reading at home, keep it fun, work on actor voice, character voice, different fun voices that we can give the characters, and it'll also give us the opportunity to share favourite books. I will share, and hopefully you will be able to share as well. So with that being said, let's find out what book our younger children and older children will be working on this week starting. Ta-da! Our older children are going to be listening to The Twits by Roald Dahl. It's no surprise that I've picked a Roald Dahl book, because he is one of my all-time favourite children's author. I love his stories, and we also celebrate Roald Dahl Week once a year in the classes. where we work on one of his stories in acting, singing and dancing. Now I've picked The Twits because it's my favourite Roald Dahl book, and I would love to play Mrs. Twit. So if there's any theatre companies out there that want a Mrs. Twit, I can play. I would love to have a go at playing her on stage. So what I've said to our younger children in their video is I want us to think about using our drama skills and acting skills when it comes to reading. So it's wonderful that we're going to read, and when you next pick up a book, be it at night time, be it during the day, I want you to think about how you can use your voice to lift the story off the page. And that comes in several different ways. Your narrator voice, which is the person that's telling the story, that can stay as your natural voice, so how you would normally talk. But when you come to the characters that are in the story, I want you to think about different voices you could use for those characters. And we do this all the time in classes because we use our voice all the time for acting. And when we do different scene work, we have to choose different ways to speak as our characters, and it's exactly the same with reading. So really think about that. Think about, you know, maybe at home you could read aloud, you could pick a book up, have a look at the characters, make some choices for those characters in terms of your voice. You know, is it a gentle character with a gentle voice? Is it a grumpy character with a grumpy voice, or a strong voice? Is it a mean character? And really think about how you can project that into your voice to lift it off the page. And maybe you could read aloud at home to somebody and try the different character voices. So I'm going to read some chapters each week from the Twits, and I'll be doing narrator voice, Mr. Twit voice, Mrs. Twit's voice, and come in and out of those voices to give you an example. If you want to record an audiobook, if you want to pick a book at home, it doesn't have to be as long as this book, and obviously I'm going to use this book over a period of weeks. But if you maybe wanted to pick a shorter book and that had some characters in, and you could record that and create your own audiobook and send in to me, I can add it to this series, which would be wonderful, especially with our older children, because I know how talented you all are, even when we do our acting classes. So it would be wonderful to hear your character voices, and that's how we can put reading and acting together. Now, before I start the chapters of this book, I want to show you something. This is Roald Dahl's Puffin Passport, and I keep it in my office space at home, and I wanted to share it with you so that we can get some information about the author before we start the book. And it might also inspire you to create your own Puffin Passport at home. And if you'd like to do that, I will leave the details in the description box underneath this video. So let's have a look then. So the Puffin Passport starts off with Roald Dahl's picture or passport photo. So let's see if I can bring that up so you can have a look. And then it goes on to the autograph. So that is Roald Dahl's autograph. Let's make sure it's still in shot. And the birthday is the 13th of September 1916, and we celebrate Roald Dahl Week once a year in September, and we do it in the week that the birthday falls in, and we look at one of his books every year and celebrate it. Colour of eyes, blue-grey. Colour of hair, greyish. Special virtue, never satisfied with what I've done. And that makes me think he was a perfectionist. Special vice, drinking. Favourite colour is yellow. Favourite food is caviar. Now, if you don't know what caviar is, I would encourage you to have a little look on Google. Type in caviar, which is spelled C-A-V-I-A-R, and see what comes up. It's very expensive. Next is favourite music, which was Beethoven. Favourite personality, so his favourite people was his wife and children. Favourite sound is piano, and that's one of my favourites as well. Favourite TV programme is the news. Favourite smell is bacon frying. Favourite book when young, I think it says Mr. Midshipman Easy. I think that's what that says. I don't know that book, so I might have to Google. If I wasn't an author, I'd like to be a doctor. My most frightening moment in a hurricane, 1941, RAF. Because Roald Dahl used to be a pilot before he was an author. My funniest moment, being born. And my motto, so the motto is something that he tried to live his life by. I will bring this up because the writing is quite small. I'm hoping that you can see that. And it says, my candle burns at both ends. It will not last the night. But oh my foes and oh my friends, it fires a lovely light. So, that is Roald Dahl's Puffin Passport. And I hope it's given you some fun facts. And if you would like to do yours, I will leave the details below. Now let's move on to the twits. You can enjoy this audio book by plugging in your headphones and listening to the words without watching the video, or you can plug your headphones in and watch the video, because I'm putting an adaptation onto it because I'm going to let you see the book and see the pages as I go through. Or you don't have to use headphones at all. You can just either listen to the video or you can watch it and have a look at some of the illustrations as we go along. So inside the twits, the characters are Mr. Twit, Mrs. Twit, the roly-poly bird and the muggle-wump monkeys. I am going to read up to the frog this week. Hairy faces. What a lot of hairy-faced men there are around nowadays. When a man grows hair all over his face, it is impossible to tell what he really looks like. Perhaps that's why he does it. He'd rather you didn't know. Then there's the problem of washing. When the very hairy ones wash their faces, it must be as big a job as when you and I wash the hair on our heads. So what I want to know is this. How often do all these hairy-faced men wash their faces? Is it only once a week, like us, on Sunday nights? And do they shampoo it? Do they use a hairdryer? Do they rub hair tonic in to stop their faces from going bald? Do they go to a barber to have their hairy faces cut and trimmed? Or do they do it themselves in front of the bathroom mirror with nail scissors? I don't know. But next time you see a man with a hairy face, which will probably be as soon as you step out onto the street, maybe you will look at him more closely and start wondering about some of these things. Mr. Twit. Mr. Twit was one of these very hairy-faced men. The whole of his face, except for his forehead, his eyes and his nose, was covered with thick hair. The stuff even sprouted in revolting tufts out of his nostrils and ear holes. Mr. Twit felt that this hairiness made him look terrifically wise and grand, but in truth he was neither of these things. Mr. Twit was a twit. He was born a twit, and now at the age of 60 he was a bigger twit than ever. The hair on Mr. Twit's face didn't grow smooth and matted as it does on most hairy-faced men. It grew in spikes that stuck out straight like the bristles of a nail brush. And how often did Mr. Twit wash this bristly nail-brushy face of his? The answer is never. Not even on Sundays. He hadn't washed it for years. Dirty beards. As you know, an ordinary, unhairy face like yours or mine simply gets a bit smudgy if it is not washed often enough. And there's nothing so awful about that. But a hairy face is a very different matter. Things cling to hairs, especially food. Things like gravy go right in among the hairs and stay there. You and I can wipe our smooth faces with a flannel, and we quickly look more or less all right again. But the hairy man cannot do that. We can also, if we are careful, eat our meals without spreading food all over our faces. But not so the hairy man. Watch carefully next time you see a hairy man eating his lunch, and you will notice that even if he opens his mouth very wide, it is impossible for him to get a spoonful of beef stew or ice cream and chocolate sauce into it without leaving some of it on the hairs. Mr. Twit didn't even bother to open his mouth wide when he ate. As a result, and because he never washed, there were always hundreds of bits of old breakfasts and lunches and suppers sticking to the hairs around his face. They weren't big bits, mind you, because he used to wipe those off with the back of his hand or on his sleeve while he was eating. But if you looked closely, not that you'd ever want to, you would see tiny little specks of dried up scrambled eggs stuck to the hairs, and spinach, and tomato ketchup, and fish fingers, and minced chicken livers, and all the other disgusting things Mr. Twit liked to eat. If you looked closer still, hold your noses, ladies and gentlemen, if you peered deep into the moustachy bristles sticking out over his upper lip, you would probably see much larger objects that had escaped the wipe of his hand, things that had been there for months and months, like a piece of maggoty green cheese, or a mouldy old cornflake, or even the slimy tail of a tin sardine. Because of all this, Mr. Twit never went really hungry. By sticking out his tongue and curling it sideways to explore the hairy jungle around his mouth, he was always able to find a tasty morsel here and there to nibble on. What I am trying to tell you is that Mr. Twit was a foul and smelly old man. He was also an extremely horrid old man, as you will find out in a moment. Mrs. Twit. Mrs. Twit was no better than her husband. She did not, of course, have a hairy face. It was a pity she didn't, because that, at any rate, would have hidden some of her fearful ugliness. Take a look at her. Have you ever seen a woman with an uglier face than that? I doubt it. But the funny thing is that Mrs. Twit wasn't born ugly. She'd had quite a nice face when she was young. The ugliness had grown upon her year by year as she got older. Why would that happen? I'll tell you why. If a person has ugly thoughts, it begins to show on the face. And when that person has ugly thoughts every day, every week, every year, the face gets uglier and uglier, until it gets so ugly you can hardly bear to look at it. A person who has good thoughts cannot ever be ugly. You can have a wonky nose and a crooked mouth and a double chin and stick out teeth, but if you have good thoughts, they will shine out of your face like sunbeams, and you will always look lovely. Nothing shone out of Mrs. Twit's face. In her right hand she carried a walking stick. She used to tell people that this was because she had warts growing on the sole of her left foot, and walking was painful. But the real reason she carried a stick was so that she could hit things with it. Things like dogs and cats and small children. And then there was the glass eye. Mrs. Twit had a glass eye that was always looking the other way. The glass eye. You can play a lot of tricks with a glass eye because you can take it out and pop it back in again any time you like. You can bet your life Mrs. Twit knew all the tricks. One morning she took out her glass eye and dropped it into Mr. Twit's mug of beer when he wasn't looking. Mr. Twit sat there drinking the beer slowly. The froth made a white ring on the hairs around his mouth. He wiped the white froth onto his sleeve and wiped his sleeve on his trousers. "You're plotting something," Mrs. Twit said, keeping her back turned so he wouldn't see that she had taken out her glass eye. "Whenever you go all quiet like that, I know very well you're plotting something." Mrs. Twit was right. Mr. Twit was plotting away like mad. He was trying to think up a really nasty trick he could play on his wife that day. "You better be careful," Mrs. Twit said, "because when I see you starting to plot, I watch you like a wombat." "Oh, do shut up, you old hag," Mr. Twit said. He went on drinking his beer, and his evil mind kept working away on the latest horrid trick he was going to play on the old woman. Suddenly, as Mr. Twit tipped the last drop of beer down his throat, he caught sight of Mrs. Twit's awful glass eyes staring up at him from the bottom of the mug. It made him jump. "I told you I was watching you," cackled Mrs. Twit. "I've got eyes everywhere, so you better be careful." The frog. To pay her back for the glass eye in his beer, Mr. Twit decided he would put a frog in Mrs. Twit's bed. He caught a big one down by the pond and carried it back secretly in a box. That night, when Mrs. Twit was in the bathroom getting ready for bed, Mr. Twit slipped the frog between her sheets. Then he got into his own bed and waited for the fun to begin. Mrs. Twit came back and climbed into her bed and put out the light. She lay there in the dark scratching her tummy. Her tummy was itching. Dirty old hags like her always have itchy tummies. Then, all at once, she felt something cold and slimy crawling over her feet. She screamed. "What's the matter with you?" Mr. Twit said. "Help!" screamed Mrs. Twit, bouncing about. "There's something in me bed!" "I'll bet it's that giant skilly wiggler I saw on the floor just now," Mr. Twit said. "That what?" screamed Mrs. Twit. "I tried to kill it, but it got away," Mr. Twit said. "It's got teeth like screwdrivers." "Help!" screamed Mrs. Twit. "Save me! It's all over me feet!" "It'll bite off your toes," said Mr. Twit. Mrs. Twit fainted. Mr. Twit got out of bed and fetched a jug of cold water. He poured the water over Mrs. Twit's head to revive her. The frog crawled up from under the sheets to get near the water. It started jumping about on the pillow. Frogs love water. This one was having a good time. When Mrs. Twit came to, the frog had just jumped onto her face. This is not a nice thing to happen to anyone in bed at night. She screamed again. "By golly, it is a giant skilly wiggler," Mr. Twit said. "It'll bite off your nose." Mrs. Twit leapt out of bed and flew downstairs and spent the night on the sofa. The frog went to sleep on her pillow. I hope you enjoyed listening to those chapters. We will continue with the next set of chapters next week. Please leave me some requests in the comments below for any books you would maybe like me to look at or read for you as part of the series. And if you would like to record your own audiobook that I can post as part of the series, then please do. I'd love to hear your reading, and I'd love to hear some character voice work that you've done at home. And I'm also going to set you a little task or a little challenge, and it will be to create a Mr. Twit beard. So in the description box below, I'm going to leave a link which will take you to a page where you can print off a Mr. Twit beard, and you can design a beard and put all types of gruesome food and bits and bobs stuck in between all the mats and the hairs. If you don't have access to a printer, you can do this by taking a plain piece of paper and just drawing a beard and designing it, whichever way you would like to do that. You can also do the puffin task as well, which was the puffin passport task, and you could draw a picture of yourself, and you can list all the different things, autograph, birthday, and make it look nice, maybe put some designs around, and you could also do that if you would like to. So I hope that keeps you busy, and you can always rewind and listen to these chapters again. And until then, I will see you all next week. Keep reading!